So, my name's Lyle Jensen, also known as DJ Archive. I'm the co-owner of MMD Records here in Cape Town, South Africa, and I've been DJing the Twilight Psytrance genre for probably close to 18 years. Moving forward, I met actually the owner of Demonic and Mtronic Records, and they're based in France, and they pretty much are like one of the premier dark and synthwave labels. Now, I'd love to be able to bring that back into Cape Town, well, into the SA scene, because there used to be a huge cybergoth, cyberpunk movement back in the day. I hate saying back in the day, but you know what? It is what it is. But it's funny because all those cybergoths and all those like metalheads, they used to come to the trance parties also because the similarities between the genres, there was a bit of a line running through them. And I think that's like based upon a lot of the time when it comes to the age of the producers and who was making what when. I don't think people understand how time actually plays into the evolution of music. I mean, like if you were thinking of the original producers like Tortured Brain and Psy Chaos and Tristan, their original influences usually came from genres like industrial and probably stuff like hard house and the original early 90s techno, which was way more industrial in itself. So honestly, if you go and jump 15, 20 years later, you can't expect a kid who was listening to Avicii and Skrillex and be able to relate to music that was literally inspired by the music of that time. So I think it's a generational thing also. It's something I'm having to deal with as I get older also, because obviously I'm a bit jaded and I'm very loyal to my genres and I don't like to see things change. I was very upset when thrash metal kind of started to get squeezed out for grunge in the 90s. I don't know why people are shocked that I'm angry that things are going more progressive, slower, or more modulation orientated rather than melody related, when that was the core thing that got me hooked to psytrance back in the day in the first place. So I don't know. It's a weird type of thing, trying to kind of wrap my mind around how this evolution is kind of moving within these genres. I think things are blending together a little bit more. I think we were in kind of disarray about 5-6 years ago, but I think the producers that are kind of coming into the works now are kind of figuring things out and are being inspired by a lot of producers that have a lot of their ideologies based upon the oldest styles of music also. A lot of the Forest and a lot of the high-tech DJs actually are huge, well, high-tech DJs and producers. They're huge metalheads also. Their interest usually within metal is different to what us at like MMD are into, which we're more interested in the riffs and the percussion, those distorted sounds that kind of hook you. So with high-tech and Forest, they tend to be more into the rhythmic. So the pace of the tunes. So you've got, let's say, a Slayer tune, for example, again. Those are generally 300 BPM. Now, a blast beat like that is retardedly fast compared to what people are used to when it comes to psytrance. But with high-tech and Gabber and Psycore, those higher BPM genres, those sit around about the 180 to 240 BPM range. Guys like myself and Kilowatt, for example, we go so far back, myself and Byron, and we always have a laugh at the scene in general, because I think social media has a lot to do with this. Like, people tend to look at you on social media as that's the real person. It's like, it's not really like that. We're all kind of pseudo-personalities of ourselves. Now, obviously, with someone like with myself, I try to be as genuine and straightforward as possible within a certain number of characters. But realistically speaking, people tend to look at us all as certain brands in themselves within the genre. So it's like Byron's talking and people look at him as the owner of Byron or Samson's Biltong and Kilowatt, whereas they look at me as like that evil metalhead Satan fucking dude, and that's not who I am. I mean, we're pretty normal people. If anything, I think the fact that we're so grounded is probably attributes as to why we've been able to stay so long in the scene and not be, you know, squeezed out, because a lot of producers came before us and they all threw in those headphones. So it's weird. I don't know. I kind of wonder, I do wonder about the future sometimes, but I am optimistic because there's still a lot of youngsters coming in that like that old Twilight sound, that sound that made South Africa essentially popular in the 2000s. There are a lot of, well, I'll say kids, but technically after 21, you're technically an adult, supposedly. So I would say then the new upcoming breed, the new kids, they're kind of into it. They like the old Shift and Artifact and Fix and Pitch Hikers and Twisted System and Hydroglyph and all of the original guys. So as long as there's that next generation that's interested in it, I don't see a reason to stop releasing the music. You know, somebody needs to do it. I mean, that's pretty much exactly this thing with the label going into metal, is that somebody needs to do this, you know.
So tell us the name of your record label and how did you guys start?
All right. Well, name of the label is MMD Records, Mind Manipulation Device, obviously MMD for short. Started by myself and Lauren Sonnenberg, aka Zion Linguist. That was back in 2005, November, we came together. Found ourselves an original business partner who unfortunately died maybe 4 months before our first outdoor event, which happened in January 2006. And yeah, we've been going now 15 years, over 120 releases to date. And yeah, recently just diversified the label into 2 labels. The one which will focus more on psytrance, as we always have, but we're going to call that MMD White. And then we have the opposite brand, which will focus more on analog extreme metal and other types of extreme music. Basically, if it's got attitude, we're going to try get it out there. And obviously focus a little bit more on the SA bands, because they really do need the help. So yeah, that's pretty much the story. I've been DJing now close to 20 years, 18 years. I think the first outdoor event, psytrance party I ever went to was in 99. I would think I was in grade 11, so still underage. You know, they were nice and welcoming back then, so, you know. Anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much the origin of MMD. I mean, we pretty much started two guys from the valley, which is the Cormacky, Fisher, Glen, Ken, Simonstown area, pretty much the coastal side. And yeah, we brought in literally 6 or 7 other producers, all that had like a similar attitude and intensity in their music, but with that similar little thread of commonality in the tone of their music that kind of kept them together. So we kind of started the label based upon getting a crew together of guys to kind of, you know, push the music as a solid unit, as opposed to everybody kind of trying to get signed to whichever label and therefore having to mimic or change or morph their sound in order to fit in what those labels were looking for. We tried to get the most purest, organic feeling music from them. And obviously, because of the fact that I knew the guys and I was almost first in, I got a nice wide selection of tunes to go through. Because contrary to what a lot of people think, producers like Frozen Ghost, Higher Ant, Rubik's Cube, Iron Linguist, they didn't always make a dance floor mega bomb hit. There were a lot of strikes and misses back in the day. So it was nice to be able to actually go through and have a wide variety of tunes to kind of showcase those producers in the light that we wanted to kind of promote them. And it worked out. So obviously now, diversifying the label now into two, we have essentially 6 or 7 bands, and we are mirror imaging what we pretty much did in 2005 when we started, and pretty much have all these bands that are similar, all a high level of production, and all have that line of similarity, but just different enough so that they would stand out individually in a concert. And all are fantastic live sets. When it comes to a live performance, they're the guys that know what they're doing. And that's what we've always kind of needed for the label. We've kind of always needed to surround ourselves with guys that have an honest interest in the music, a true passion for the music, and trying to be as genuine as possible. We're not trying to sugarcoat anything. We're not trying to fit in, because initially when the SA labels like Timecode and Nano Records started, they went with a similar idea, just their friends and their colleagues, and they were able to shift the scene, for use of a better word, into a route where 3 or 4 other continents were trying to mimic the South African sound. And I do feel over time we've kind of lost our individuality, that kind of pure element of what made South African Psy. And I wouldn't say this is separate to the events, to the parties, because the nature of the scene, the parties are doing better than they ever have. Ticket prices are sky high, but you're getting these productions that are on a level that can compete with Rainbow Serpent, Boom, Azora, Modem, all of them. And South Africa is always in the conversation when it comes to international psytrance events. So with that in mind, it kind of demoralizes me that so many producers who tried to be unique and create their own sound, a sound that was proudly South African, have now kind of opted for a sound more European or Goa or psychedelic, whatever you want to call it, in order to stay relevant. The scene, in my opinion, it was flourishing in the earlier 2000s also. There were 10,000 odd people that went to the Millennium Party. So, you know, big turnouts at events have been going on for 20, 25 odd years since the psytrance scene started here in South Africa. So, I don't know. It's a peculiar situation. I'm still optimistic, and like I said, I'm always trying to push the producers to be as genuine as possible. If they want to make a sound that has like a crunchy, distorted riff instead of a modulated, alien, squelchy sound, they must go for it. It needs to come from within. And that's the big difference between producers and bands. Because bands, they tend to have the creativity down, but they need someone to actually hone that into an audible thing for the common listener to digest. Whereas with producers, they're always aiming at producing the highest level of produced track that they can, something that could compete with the likes of an Azax or a Bliss or an Ace Ventura or a Coming Soon or whatever the genre is, or ZZ Bing. Let's just mention him for fun. But I think that's kind of the situation. There needs to be labels out there that will allow producers to produce what they want. And nobody ever holds back a band when they're producing or writing a new song. So I don't feel like there should be limitations when it comes to the producers either.
What is the average day in the life of your record label? What do you guys do for your artists, and how are you different to other record labels?
Okay, well, pretty good question. I mean, the label per se has always been a DIY project. I've told many people in the past that I almost live 2 pseudo lives. I have my average day job that I would work in, and then I have the label, which I focus on literally when I get home almost every night, because by the time the day starts to end here in South Africa, everybody in America and Mexico start to wake up, and as we have a lot of producers and connections out there, that's when the networking starts. So Sometimes I deal with a lot of being burnt out on both ends type scenario, but it is worth it. I think as far as the basic runnings of the label, it usually comes down to contacting the designers, contacting the engineers, and contacting the bands or the producers and trying to stick to a deadline. Most of the time, and it took us a while before we actually went and became really efficient in our admin, so to speak. But most of the time we try to work on a 6 to 8 week turnover for the albums that are coming out. It gives us enough time to individually promote each of the bands or artists. And from there, we usually use about 2 to 3 weeks post album release. So it took us a while to be able to get to a point where we would have an album that would come out 6 weeks from now, and then already 3 weeks from now, because we submitted 4 weeks prior to that, there was a bleed over so that the next release would come out 3 weeks from now. And now, obviously, with us moving more into bands and psytrance, we've pretty much doubled our release schedule. So now I've gone from 6 weeks down to 4 weeks, down to basically almost one release a week. So it's basically maintaining a relationship with the designers, the artists, trying to make sure that the bands and the engineers that are recording the bands and the mastering engineers that are doing the final masters, whether it's for the bands or for the psytrance producers, whether or not they can meet the deadlines and the graphic designers meet the deadlines. We get all the promo done. And then obviously try to dedicate about a day, well, not a day, an hour of each day to schedule relative social media posts. We've got so many things that always get pushed by the label, but I try not to over congest it because it becomes a little bit of a sensory overload for people if we end up posting a new post every 3 hours. But we definitely could. I just try to keep things as organic as possible without having to actually pay Mark Zuckerberg and the Facebook corporate to get that reach to people. MMD has never been a label that has force-fed the music. We've never pushed it down people's throats. We've been very similar to the comparison of going to a rock show, going to a metal concert. You would initially be quite intimidated by all these peeps in black and all the pentagrams and all this. But once you actually get into the crowd, you'll feel more solidarity and more of that Simonier vibe than you would at some of the most major psytrance festivals. So that's kind of the same aspect as what we try to do with the people. We've never thrown MMD in people's faces. We've kind of just always opened up the door, and if you want to walk in, maybe you'll be surprised. And obviously, as the years go on, there's a whole new generation. Every 5 years, generally within the psytrance scene, there is a new generation of partygoers that generally will not know the music further than 5 years prior. So that's also why the music has changed. I think we've dealt with probably 4 or 5 cycles already now. So to expect a kid who has just turned 18 in 2000 and, in 2020 and born in 2002, you can't expect them to know necessarily the original creators of the music unless they actually go outright and research it. But in today's day and age, everybody's dealing with so much sensory overloading from social media, from work, from real life, from SARS, from being in South Africa and dealing with load shedding, stuff like that, which just gets the morale down. So it's hard for people to go and research their history, where I feel a lot of the older generation have always been able to do tape trading or CD trading with friends, and that's how you ended up finding a lot of new bands, and that's how those bands ended up becoming super bands. Bands like Marilyn Manson, Rage Against the Machine, Korn, Slipknot, those were all passed around social circles without having the intervening of anything like the internet or social media. It was all basically organic reach obviously fed by the online publications that ended up turning them into media darlings, but the end result is still basically the same. The word of mouth and organic reach, you can't beat it. Like, if people are talking about you, whether it's good or bad, there's that saying there's no publicity, no publicity is bad publicity. So any publicity is good publicity. So notoriety is one of the things nowadays. That could be one of the factors also as to why the scene has somewhat changed because of the intervening of social media. The fact now that record labels essentially became we became kind of null and void. A lot of bands and a lot of producers were able to find their own independent distributors to distribute them to sites like iTunes or Spotify or wherever at a rate. So the relevance of a label became, very limited in the last few years. But obviously, trying to interest people enough and keep them coming into the scene, knowing that there are variations of subgenres, that's kind of where we're at, because we're in a time now where every producer has basically become their own brand. Back in the day, you would be represented by a label. Like, for example, I obviously co-own MMD Records. I represent a Spanish label called Dropland Records, as well as a Japanese/Mexican label called Terra Lab Industries, and have so for 5 years. So the whole idea would be kind of turning myself into a brand and becoming indispensable based upon Archive, as opposed to Archive, who is part of MMD or part of Dropland. So again, the relevance of a label has kind of changed in a lot, because now the producers are online. They're having to promote themselves in the third person, which is weird for a lot of them. As I said, a lot of bands are creatives. They're not very, and I'm not discrediting any of the bands, but a lot of them are very right hemisphere orientated. They're very creative, but they don't have the practical admin left hemisphere of the brain where they can function in a way which promotes that creativity. It's usually one or the other. There are a few guys that tether between both, but they are few. So that's one of the big changes also, because back when the scene started, you'd be able to see producers under the banner of a record label, and you would automatically know, based upon that record label's track history with their releases, what general tone or sound you were going to get from the music. Obviously now everybody is promoting themselves like, hi, I'm the guy, catch me here, I've got a whole bunch of new tunes. A lot of DJs and producers are even going further to not release actively with labels and just release independently. One of the guys that only recently started actually putting music out on other labels besides from his own independently owned label is Rinkadink. He literally would just put out a single on his own record label that he bought the rights to. I can't even remember the name. It's a silly name, but it literally was just a way for him to independently release his music without having to deal with a middleman. And I think that's one of the big things with MMD and myself as a fan of these genres, is that I try to be proactive and I try to encourage and give info and advice to all of these producers based upon my experience within the industry. But I try not to force my agenda onto them. I still try to have them have their creative control, because at the end of the day, like I said, it needs to be organic. It needs to come from them. I don't want to lead them in a direction that, it benefits me. What will benefit me is a true representation of them. So I think that's why the listeners and the fans that we've had for the last 15 years have been really loyal and really patient with us, because there was a period between 2012 and 2015, where, as far as twilight and nighttime, full on those subgenres goes, they pretty much shit the bed. There were so many negative connotations that were being filtered around the scene. It was pretty much cats screaming, noisy, tick trance, whatever the silly stereotype that they would make up, they would literally put us into a box. And if there's one thing I've always hated in my life is to be put into a box. You can't put me into into one category. I'm not like that, and none of our artists are like that. They all come from a fascination of the original type of Twilight sound that was created here. So, as I said, I'm basically acting, and MMD is basically acting as a conduit to showcase that to the world. And as I said, we've been going 15 years. We've debuted probably more new artists from across the globe that have ended up having rather prosperous careers until they decided to move on with their life. But that's a choice that they make. But I think I would arguably say that we've released more debut releases than any other label in the country. I would argue almost more than anybody within the Twilight subgenres. So it's a bold statement. Somebody can tell me whether or not I'm wrong. I would love to know. But yeah, I mean, that's always been my thing. I've always been a fan of the underdog. And I've always thought of MMD kind of as the underdog. I mean, nobody really wanted us here. We kind of, back when we started in 2005, we had a handful of producers that came from either Nexus Media or Timecode, and then maybe one or two other internationals that we had briefly spoken to. But most of the producers that we ended up dealing with ended up seeing our vision of, we're a family. We're all in this together. It doesn't help if we're all on our own trying to make this. I mean, we're literally, we're the subgenre of the subgenre of the subgenre. So it's like there's a small percentage of us, but it's a strong following when it comes to Twilight. And that's probably the one thing that I correlate to metal, is that it's like a family. And obviously, Psytrance, we are all one, peace, love, unity, respect, and all of that. But when it comes to extreme, and I think we are pretty much the extreme metal of what Psytrance is. And as long as there are a bunch of kids that have angst and are fed up with the world, they're not going to want soft, easy listening. Sometimes they're going to want to just stomp or swing their hair around, and we try to be the conduits to provide that soundtrack for them.
So you recently wrote an article about the South African scene for an international magazine. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, actually, I just submitted that last week, which to anybody watching this later would have been at the beginning of February. So I was invited to do another editorial, a South African review for the German publication Mushroom Magazine. Now, that publication stopped printing hard copy print media a few years ago, with cutting trees down. It wasn't relevant, especially with the intervening of social media, but they always had an annual article, a small publication called the Trance's Guide to the Galaxy, which features every country with a Psytrance scene. And I was originally invited to do their 2014 edition, and obviously through turmoil and through all the changes, it kind of slipped through the cracks over the years, but they're now back and they're doing a 2020 edition. And yes, like you said, I was invited to actually do a 4,000 word article, which ended up ironically being streamlined down to 2,000 words. So yeah, it was quite easy. It was not difficult to talk and give praise towards the Psytrance scene here in South Africa. We have a booming Psytrance scene. My personal dissatisfaction with certain musical elements aside, you can't really question our events. The production is better than it ever has been. The venues are beautiful. I mean, it's flourishing, and across the board, whether it be in Durban, the Garden Route, Johannesburg, or here in Cape Town, it's all, there's nice pockets of stompers across, you know, across all the provinces, and that's a great thing. That's something that the world needs to know. So I hope people like it. I try to be as objective as possible and as positive and open-minded as possible, trying to look at it from an international's perspective of what you would need to look into when coming here, and how factors like transport and lodging, and even the question of visa applications to get into here, and the currency exchange, just basic factors that a lot of South Africans would take for granted. So it was a great opportunity, and I'm extremely happy that they invited me back, and I hope I did South Africa justice by what I wrote, so time will tell.
So the South African scene has had a lot of great producers that have come and gone. Why do you think a lot of them have hung up their headphones, so to speak? Yeah.
It's hard to say. I mean, I've heard a lot of more veterans, shall I say, saying that every DJ and every band and every producer eventually has their sell-by date. There could be a lot of factors that kind of relate to this issue. Number one is just generally getting old, wanting to move on and do different things in your life. A lot of these producers that did hang up the headphones gave it their all for a good decade and a half plus. So most of them have bucket listed every gig, every continent that they needed to ever play on. So there ends up being a period, like a point in your career, where you wonder whether or not you're just rehashing the same routine. And obviously it's those producers that throw that little piece of vital information and they put that into their pocket, and they just get onto their flights and they do their commutes from continent to continent. And those are the producers that end up generally making it, because they've been able to throw away a big part of their life, which is normal stability in your life. I think a lot of another huge factor would probably be another thing that I was mentioned to by another big organizer who I won't mention his name, but the idea of youth supporting youth. One of the biggest issues, and maybe issues isn't the correct word, but one of the biggest pitfalls is that the generations tend to come in and they are interested in different styles of music. And their friends, who are the direct core target market of festivals, usually being the 18 to 25 demographic, which makes up the big portion of the numbers at those festivals, the organizers recognize that youth supports youth. So if you book a young producer who has a lot of friends on social media, they've grown up with social media, they do not know a world without it, they're going to have a lot more organic reach than hypothetically someone like, let's say me, for example, because I actually don't want to mention any other producer in fear of being martyred afterwards. But the reality of the matter is that a producer who is 20, 21 years old with a whole bunch of friends who are 20, 21 years old who are all proactively attending those events, they're more likely to go support that producer or DJ more so than a bunch of mid-30-year-old, you know, guys that have to punch in for work 9 to 5 and probably have a family and kids. So life tends to be the factor, and the factors of age. Obviously, this is not a rule of thumb, because there are a lot of producers that have gone on from their mid-30s and are still going. It kind of comes down to the factor of keeping your brand image alive, keeping yourself relevant in the minds of people, which is another thing that social media has done a lot. So it is what it is. It's a weird thing. I think a lot of people I think a lot of people forget that we were young. Like a lot, if people realized that we were once young and we were those party goers supporting those new producers who were in fact young also at that time, the evolution hasn't really changed. The nature of how the evolution of a producer or a DJ hasn't changed in 20 years. I truly believe the guys like from Timecode and Nexus Media, they were into the original Tip World and the original 3D Vision and Spun Records, and then through us, the next second wave of twilight and nighttime DJs and producers, we kind of went to the next level. We aspired to sound somewhat like the local new producers that were coming out, the Shifts, the Hydroglyphs, the Artifacts, etc., etc. And I think that's kind of it. I mean, I think we started the label as an homage to the genre, you know, to keep the genre alive because it meant so much to us. I honestly don't know a lot of party goers that go to events now that have started 2-3 years ago that might even still be going to events. The retaining of information from parties now is so limited, mainly because the music, without sounding old, because this is what my folks always used to say, it's like, oh, that music, it just sounds all the same. But it really does. There is very little to distinguish a lot of the music that gets played at the festivals. It's usually just based upon 2 or 3 genres that run through the party. So it's, I don't know what it would be like to be a first-time party goer now and going to an event. I don't know if I would like it, but maybe I would absolutely love it. I guess time will tell. All I know is that a lot of the original generation of party goers that were attending events, that number probably has dropped down to maybe 10% of the original crowd. And the ironic thing is that back in the day when I was first attending parties, I was considered a lighty. Oh, look at these young punks coming to the party. So I can empathize with the youngsters being like pushed around. Not to say that I'm not going to kick their ass and, you know, smack them on the side of the head and say this is how it should be done, because everybody should have that little bit of critical information. There was always those guys that would have told us how to handle things at parties and how to go through an event, right? And, you know, just the basic premise of how to have a great, safe, fun party. And I think the more the generation kind of broadens and gets deeper and deeper, and the more that the older generation leaves for whatever their reasons are, it kind of leaves a void. And that's why you have like a lot of kids. And obviously it's a little bit of a dark topic, but a lot of the kids where you have like ODs and freakouts because of certain substances, because they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to time things, etc., etc. There is a book, I think, that is called, it's like How to Party or something, but it was given out during the early 2000s, and they've just started reprinting editions now, and that has all the valuable information on how to do things and what to do and in what moderation, and just basic common sense things that a lot of partygoers would not take any interest into learning, and they have to figure out the hard way by being woken up in a medic tent, which is something that was not prevalent back in the day, again, because we've had our asses kicked. We had the elders basically telling us, do this, do that, through experience. And you can't pass on experience. So you've got all these new generation partygoers that are full of piss and vinegar that all want to jaw their asses off and have no idea on what they're even getting into. A lot of them have not experienced being at an outdoor festival for 24 hours, you know, 36 hours, 72 hours. These are, you know, there needs to be a balance. So I think that's also why I'm still here, as the moral compass, just to kind of keep everybody in check that is, you know, within my social circle. You know, I don't want the people that I associate with, newcomers or other, to actually fall prey to stupid stuff like that, because parties are meant to be a release. It's not supposed to be how wasted you can get. So that's my personal opinion. Again, I always got into music, the scene for the music. I try not to look at the dark underbelly. I'm well aware of it. I've been around it forever, but you could still look, in spite of the curtain behind Wonderland. You still can. You can still find the positive in it. And the one thing that is positive is music. Even if the pool of talent for our specific genre has narrowed down to almost maybe 15, 20% of what it was 5-6 years ago, there still are producers that are out there that are producing that music. And as long as they're producing it, I feel I should be the one that is releasing it, at least the best of it. So, yeah.
Okay, so on your Facebook, I see all these mentions of Japan. What's going on there?
Well, depending on when this podcast ends up running, I should be in Japan for the entire March. I leave basically on the 5th of March. For about a week, I'm going to be spending time. I'll be traveling from Tokyo through to Kansai. That's Kansai. Just for the record, it's not the other spelling. Anyway, so I'll be flying out from Tokyo to Kansai, which is actually, the airport is actually built on heaps of garbage that is built on the ocean. So it's going to be quite interesting actually landing on that in itself. And I'll be spending a few days with the owner of Jackhammer Music, a guitarist, label owner called Wazzy. And he pretty much is one of the largest independent distributors of independent metal in Japan. So I'm looking forward to spending a couple of days with him and his son and do a little bit of sightseeing and just talk metal and how we can work with our two labels and really, you know, push both of our brands together as a unit. Because again, it's one of the main things I've been trying to do with MMD Black in the metal industry is bring in a bit more solidarity, bring in the ethos of what I've learned from Psytrance into the metal community, have people as focused and together promoting a product as a whole, as a unit, as opposed to everybody doing their own thing and trying to hope for the best, because there's a lot of music in this world and a lot of artists trying to make it, and we're at the ass end of Africa, so the odds are not good for us. And this is probably why in the last 25 years we've only had maybe 2 or 3 metal bands in the whole country that have been signed to an international label. So that's pretty much what we're trying to rectify here. So back to the story. What am I doing? I'm spending a few days in Kansai with the Jackhammer Music guys. We got to talk music, and then I'm going to go meet up with Kesuke in very near Osaka. I'll be meeting up with Kesuke of B55, who are a lot of people, a lot of old party goers will remember from performing here in South Africa 13 years ago at Resonance. So that was the event where the stage almost collapsed when the people came on and started stomping on the floor. Funny side story to that, I was actually the stage manager of that night. And I remember when B55 came on and they were banging. I mean, at that time, to have that type of music played at midnight as opposed to 4 or 5 in the morning, it was like, oh geez. So people went absolutely bananas, and maybe 30 or 40 people tried to storm the stage, and I was the stage manager. And I will add that I was a terrible stage manager because they basically all ran right past me. And then Colin DJ Wobbles, the owner of Alien Safari, came up, saw these people stomping on the stage around B55, and he was like, "You had one job to do, Lyle, and you blew it." That was the last time I ever did stage management. After that, I just was like, okay, I'll release some music rather. This is no good. So, yeah, I'll be spending a couple of days with Keske, which will be amazing. It's going to be fantastic to catch up with him. And then I am playing at 2 parties with the Yabai Records guys, which is going to be amazing because for, I think, about 14 years, MMD Records and Yabai Records have always worked alongside each other. But I've, in fact, never met the actual label owners, Yuji and Satoshi, in person. So this is going to be, it's going to be a very special weekend, that, and to see also fellow South African producer Damage on the lineup, who's now basically an expat living in Japan, married with Japanese kid, etc., etc. It's going to be a special one. And then I am back to Tokyo for the last week, where I'll be heading to Knotfest Tokyo in Japan. So, Knotfest Japan in Tokyo. That's the correct term. And yeah, that's Slipknot, Korn, Baby Metal, Anthrax, Marilyn Manson, Trivium. And that's all just on one day. So it is going to be quite an exciting trip. And then in between, just try to do a little bit of tourist stuff. I want to go visit the largest CD store in Japan. It's 4 stories high. Only focusing on metal on the top 3 stories, black metal on the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, death metal, 4th floor is power metal and new metal, and then I think there's another floor above that just of secondhand. And the Japanese take really good care of their CDs. Most of the time they'll just buy the album, extract it so that it's on their phone or on their PC, and then they sell it immediately. So you will barely ever find any scratches on any of the CDs. And likewise, they even sell secondhand t-shirts there, which obviously a lot of guys just buy at a show as support for the bands, because that's the big difference with Japanese as opposed to a lot of other countries, is that they're very supportive of a band. When a band becomes famous or popular in that country, they are sorted forever, because any album that they put out, any merchandise they put out, every fan in Japan will always buy that piece of merchandise or that CD because they are beloved. That's why Deep Purple, since the Made in Japan in 1972, is still, they're bigger than Queen in Japan, which is, how would you think they're one of the big creators of the original hard rock heavy metal, but I mean, Queen were megastars, and it just goes to show the allegiance and the loyalty of the Japanese people. So I'm excited to see all of that in person. So that's my trip in March. We will see what happens.
So what are you busy working on, and what are you looking forward to in the future?
Well, MMD has a lot going on with us. We've pretty much, over the last few months, been assimilating a lot of older psychedelic twilight labels. Labels like Vision Records, Microdot Records, and also, again, based upon podcast release, but we're going to be announcing this in the next week or so, we're also going to be releasing the entire back catalogue of Afro-Galactic Records. That's the label that was actually the brainchild behind what became Alien Safari. It was the record label and the production for Alien Safari. And obviously, when CDs started to kind of fall out and piracy really went through the roof, I would say this is 2007, 2008. Those 3 labels, being Vision, Microdot, and Afro-Galactic, they stopped releasing music. Now, obviously, the new generation of partygoers and Psytrance listeners would have no idea about this music because it was only available on analog CDs. It was never put out digitally. Maybe a few people extracted some tracks and put them onto YouTube, but they've never been readily available via iTunes or Spotify, Deezer, etc., etc. So we're going to try keep a little bit of the nostalgia alive, and over the next few months, each month we'll be releasing one of the labels. In fact, today, the new Vision Records back catalog has now just become probably, looking at the time, probably just become available now on Beatport, Juno Download, Spotify, etc., etc. So go over, listen to that. Next month, on the 18th, we've got the Microdot discography coming out, and then in April, we will have the Afrogalactic discography coming out. In between that, those are the next 3 months. We've tried to maintain at least one Psytrance, one MMD White release, and at least one new band release under MMD Black. So this weekend, being the end of February, we have the new Fallen Prophets album, which is called Relentless Killing Motivation, which is actually the t-shirt I'm wearing here is the front cover. And after that, we have the debut EP of a Joburg producer called Synthetic Alkaloid. He's actually been DJing and producing for maybe 15 years, but again, nobody ever gave him the chance or the opportunity to ever really put himself out there. So before we all, keel over and die, I'd like to be able to at least pay this forward. And I really feel like his music has gone above and beyond, and it's now at a point where he has an identity, a unique identity that will separate him from the others and still have this unique sound. So we have that. We have a new debut EP by a duo of Singularity from Cape Town and Cypharia from Australia, and they're called Chaos Theory. We have their EP coming out at the beginning of April, and then in between all of that, we have the new Monolith album, which is a PE-based avant-garde death metal band with their new album called The Lord Conspirator, which I think they've put in about 2.5 years into this, and it is without over elaborating and seeming like a fanboy, it's probably one of my favorite albums of the year to come out, and it's hard to believe that they're a South African band, which is exactly the point. So besides from that, so we have the discographies, we have all the MMD White releases, we have the new Hulver album, which is a local thrash metal trio. Their album will be out end of March. So even though I'm away in Japan during that time, we still have a lot of music coming out and a lot of things going on. So the next few months are going to be crazy, and we have a lot of new compilations that are in the works and a few surprises that I'm hoping will become a reality after I'm back from Japan, but I guess time will tell. Thanks to Milestone Studios for having us here. It was a great backdrop to an awesome interview, and thank you to all the fans and the supporters of MMD Records, and to myself as a DJ and all of our producers and all of our bands that fall under the label. Without you, we wouldn't exist. So as long as we have you guys, then we'll be fine. And as long as you guys keep supporting, then we will keep on releasing. That's our promise to you. So thanks so much, and keep it metal, keep rocking, and keep supporting the Psy.